On the morning of April 9, 1917, all four divisions of the Canadian Corps came together for the first time at the Battle of Vimy Ridge. Many historians see the victory of the Canadian Corps at Vimy as a significant nation-building event for Canada. On April 10, 1917, Canadians from coast to coast awoke to newspaper headlines about the Battle of Vimy Ridge. The reporting was clear. Vimy Ridge was a Canadian victory. The full scale of the human cost of that victory only became known much later. By the end of the first day of the battle, more than 3,500 Canadians had been killed and over 7,000 wounded. It was the bloodiest day in Canadian military history. Newspapers show us what people of the day were reading. There were over 100 Canadian newspapers in circulation in 1917. Within those papers, there were different kinds of stories and views. In general, editorials represent the opinions of the writer, while news articles provide a factual, objective report. The stories and approach of newspapers were often shaped by factors that include wartime censorship and political preferences of the people who owned and ran the newspapers. The French-language daily newspaper Le Canada was founded in 1903 in Montreal. It had a circulation of around 18,000 and supported the Liberal Party. The English-language newspaper The Globe was founded in 1844 by George Brown in Toronto. By 1917, it had a circulation of more than 90,000. By comparing newspaper accounts on the Battle of Vimy Ridge, we can see these different approaches. There are 5 key steps to analyzing primary sources. The 5 W's: context, exploring, reaching conclusions, and finding proof. How can newspaper coverage provide a deeper understanding about Canadians' attitudes to the Battle of Vimy Ridge at the time? Consider the 5 W's. Who wrote the account? When and where was it published? Why was it written? What type of account is it? On April 11, 1917, the Globe published a dispatch from Philip Gibbs. He was a British journalist and one of the official reporters during the First World War. Gibbs was one of a small number of war correspondents allowed to go near the front lines. He was in close contact with Canadian soldiers during the battle.
The Canadian attack yesterday was astounding, successful, and carried out by high-spirited men who had before the advance an utter and joyous confidence of victory.
Just a few days later, on April 14th, Le Canada published an editorial that was written by a newspaper editor in Montreal.
C'est le glorieux 22e Régiment canadien-français. Sans doute, nos héros du 22e n'ont pas tout seuls vaincu et mis en fuite toute une armée allemande. D'ailleurs, tous nos volontaires au front ne sont pas dans le 22e. Et ceux de nos bataillons canadiens-français qui ont été dispersés dans d'autres unités n'ont certes pas moins mérité par leur vaillance et par leur élan les glorieux éloges dont on les couvre.
Yet the byline is absent, so what do we make of who wrote this account? We might infer it was Fernand Rinfret, the editor of Le Canada in 1917. What do these different perspectives tell us about how the Battle of Vimy Ridge was portrayed to the public? These are only 2 examples and do not represent all views across Canada at the time. So what other context is needed to help understand these accounts? In the early 20th century, there was a lot of tension between English-speaking and French-speaking Canadians. The issues for French-speaking Canadians included minority rights and access to French language and Catholic education in provinces outside Quebec. The war made those tensions worse. English Canadians were more likely to support the war effort, including conscription. Many people in English Canada thought that French Canadians were not as supportive as they should be.
Les Canadiens des deux races sont des frères qui n'ont entre eux qu'une seule émulation, celle de mieux faire. Et lorsqu'ils reviendront au Canada, après la victoire, les héros de Saint-Julien, de Festubert, de Courcelette et de Vimy seront indignés d'apprendre que dans certains journaux de l'Ontario et de l'Ouest, on accuse les Canadiens français de déloyalisme et de lâcheté.
This account reflects one French-Canadian attitude towards the war and is revealing of French-Canadian, English-Canadian relations. Official censorship was introduced in 1914, but there was not much need to enforce it. Most newspapers supported the war and censored themselves.
Yesterday, before daylight and afterwards, I saw this ridge of Vimy all on fire, with the light of a great gunfire. The enemy was there in strength, and his guns answered ours with a heavy barrage of high explosives. This morning, the scene was changed as by a miracle.
Journalists often portrayed the war in a positive way in order to keep morale high at home. News coverage had two purposes: to inform the public and to help win the war. How do we analyze an account from the past that we know was censored? Just because it appeared in a newspaper, does that make it factual? Continue your investigation by exploring the Globe and Le Canada pieces in more detail. What words, phrases, and symbols are used? What do they mean? What story is being told? Think about where the account is placed in the newspaper. Does a front-page headline reveal something different than a fourth-page editorial?
They went away at dawn, cheering and laughing, through the mud and rain, which made scarecrows of them.
Les vainqueurs de Vimy, et ce sera encore à ces valeureuses phalanges où Canadiens français et Anglo-Canadiens combattent coude à coude que la campagne contre le militarisme autocratique prussien devra de nouveaux succès.
How are the perspectives of the French-Canadian and English-Canadian newspapers similar or different? Before we reach a final conclusion about what newspaper coverage can tell us, we need more information. We need to compare our conclusions about French and English attitudes towards Vimy Ridge with other primary and secondary sources. How do these accounts compare to other sources you've studied? What questions do you still have? Can you identify any gaps or inaccuracies? Think of these newspaper accounts as puzzle pieces. Historians assemble and analyze tens or hundreds or even thousands of primary sources to construct a fuller picture of the past. But sources often go missing. For example, old letters from the front that tell us more about the battle firsthand might be thrown away or buried in an attic. For a historian, there is rarely a complete picture of the past. More often, we have just a window that gives us a glimpse of the bigger picture of history.